Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something that might sound familiar if you've ever felt weirdly drained around your phone or, struggled to focus in certain buildings,
hmm
or maybe just felt unwell and couldn't quite figure out why.
Yeah.
We're talking electrohypersensitivity, or EHS, sometimes called electromagnetic sensitivity. It's got some really interesting material, a big 5-year study, actually.
Yeah, it ran from 2014 to 2018, tracked 357 patients.
Hmm.
And, if you've ever wondered if that, like, constant fatigue near the Wi-Fi router, or maybe that brain fog when you're on your laptop, if that could be linked to all this tech we're swimming in, well, this deep dive might shed some light.
Exactly. So our goal today is basically to pull out the key findings from this study. What did it say about how common EHS seemed to be in this group? What were the effects people felt? And how did they explore managing it?
Right. And we'll also touch on the broader scientific conversation around EHS because, well, it's definitely a topic that gets people talking, lots of different viewpoints out there.
Okay, so this study, Aruba, 5 years. Researchers working with Dr. Robert Leal. And what caught my eye was their method. They used this really detailed questionnaire, like 29 different symptoms often linked to EHS. Plus, they asked about people's daily routines, device use. Sounds pretty thorough, like they were trying to get the whole picture.
Absolutely. And what's really insightful is they didn't just say you have EHS or you don't. They actually identified 6 different levels. It ranged from initial electrostress all the way up to advanced EHS.
6 levels, okay.
Yeah, it suggests maybe it's more of a spectrum,
Yeah.
not just an on-off switch. You might experience it to different degrees.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. So looking at those 357 people, what were the main things people were reporting? What kept coming up again and again?
Well, the data was pretty clear on the top 3. Fatigue, real difficulty concentrating, and sleep problems. Those were the big ones.
Okay, fatigue, concentration, sleep.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar for a lot of modern life, unfortunately.
Yeah. True, but here's where it gets more specific. The study started finding these potential links between types of electromagnetic radiation and the specific symptoms people had.
Oh, wow. Okay, now that's interesting. Like what? Can you give examples?
Sure. So they saw that people with more exposure to microwave signals, think Wi-Fi, mobile phones, that kind of thing, they were more likely to report ringing in the ears, tinnitus,
Uh-huh.
and also this really specific thing, a pulsing feeling in the neck.
Pulsing in the neck.
Yeah.
Huh. Never heard that one before.
Yeah, quite specific. So if you've noticed things like that around your devices, the study suggests a possible connection worth thinking about.
Okay, that covers microwaves, Wi-Fi, phones. What about other types of EMF? Do they find links there?
They did. They looked at extremely low frequency fields, ELFF fields. That's more like power lines, some industrial machinery.
Right.
And exposure to those seemed to correlate more with numbness in the hands and feet, the extremities, and also just a general pervasive tiredness.
So numbness and tiredness for ELF, ringing and neck pulses for microwaves. It's like different frequencies might have different effects, at least based on what these patients reported.
That's what the observations suggest, yeah.
Now, this term electrohypersensitivity, it's not exactly new, is it? It's been around a while.
No, not at all. It was first proposed way back in 1991 by a researcher, William Rea. He used it for patients reporting health issues seemingly triggered by EMF exposure.
Okay, early 90s.
And then in 97, European experts used it for this sort of cluster of unusual symptoms linked to EMF. So yeah, the idea has been developing for decades.
And the World Health Organization, the WHO, they've weighed in too, haven't they, with a definition?
Yes, they did. In 2004, they held a workshop specifically on EHS. They defined it as an adverse health condition where people experience symptoms near devices emitting electromagnetic or electromagnetic fields.
So official recognition of the reported experience.
Exactly. It was a big step in acknowledging that these people are experiencing something real, even if the exact mechanism is debated.
But there's another perspective, isn't there? One that maybe looks less at the person and more at the environment.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Ulla Johansson, he's a prominent Swedish researcher in this area, offers a slightly different take. He argues EHS isn't necessarily a medical diagnosis in the person,
Okay.
but more of a functional impairment caused by an unhealthy environment. He talks about electromagnetic pollution. So the problem isn't the person being sick. It's the environment making them unable to function properly.
That's a really different way to frame it.
Really?
So the focus shifts from what's wrong with you to what's wrong with the environment around you.
Precisely. And you mentioned Sweden. They actually recognize EHS in that context.
Oh, they do?
Yes, as a functional impairment. It means someone suffering from it isn't seen as having a disease necessarily, but as having difficulties because the environment is, well, hostile to their sensitivity. The patient, in a way, becomes the environment itself.
Wow.
And interestingly, that was kind of the underlying perspective the researchers in this Aruba study adopted too.
That's a really profound shift.
Yeah.
Now, whenever we talk about symptoms and triggers, especially ones that are debated, the power of the mind inevitably comes up. The nocebo effect.
Right.
Could you break that down? It's like the evil twin of the placebo effect,
Yeah.
like negative expectations causing negative outcomes.
Exactly. Placebo is, I believe this will help and I feel better. Nocebo is, I believe this will harm me and I feel worse. Even if the harmful thing isn't actually doing anything physiologically, just the belief can trigger real physical symptoms. Research has shown this quite clearly.
So how does nocebo potentially fit into the EHS picture? It seems like it would be incredibly tricky to separate a direct physical reaction from a belief-driven one.
It's super complex, and the researchers in this study were definitely aware of it.
Very.
Some research even suggests that things like EMFs could, in certain people, trigger a nocebo response. There was that famous 2004 study.
Wow.
People were told they were getting tiny electric shocks, couldn't feel them, but later reported severe headaches. The catch: the machine wasn't even on.
Wow. This is a suggestion.
Exactly. Shows how potent expectations can be.
And this study we're looking at, they also considered how, media reports might play into this.
Yes, they did. Referencing a 2018 study that suggested, alarmist media coverage about EMF dangers could actually worsen people's reactions. If you're constantly told something is dangerous, you might become hyper-aware, attribute unrelated symptoms to it, and just generally feel worse because of the anxiety and expectation. That's the nocebo effect potentially being amplified.
And did the researchers in the Aruba study actually see this kind of thing happening with their participants?
They did, yeah. They reported that some individuals with really severe EHS seemed to experience a nocebo reaction just by seeing technology they perceived as harmful, like a Wi-Fi router or a phone.
Even if it wasn't emitting much.
Exactly. Even when the researchers' own measurements showed no elevated EMF levels at that moment, just the sight, the idea of the threat, seemed enough to trigger physical symptoms for some. It's quite unsettling how powerful that connection can be.
That must be incredibly frustrating and confusing for the person experiencing it. How did the researchers handle that? Did they try to address the nocebo aspect?
They did, and their approach was interesting. They found that actually going into the person's home or environment with sensitive measuring equipment multiple times and showing them the actual readings, showing them objectively that they weren't being exposed to high levels at that moment, that seemed to help.
So like reality testing.
Kind of, yeah. Repeated technical confirmation. Over time, seeing the objective data helped these individuals start to break that negative association, that fear response triggered just by the sight of the tech. It wasn't instant, but it helped them gradually overcome that specific nocebo trigger.
That's really valuable, using objective data to counter the subjective fear. Okay, so let's talk about the intervention mentioned in the study. SPIRO. A subset of patients tried this.
Yes. Out of the 357, 144 agreed to deeper assessments and to try this SPIRO intervention. First, the researchers mapped out where these 144 people fell on those 6 severity levels we mentioned to get a baseline.
Right, the spectrum from electrostress to advanced EHS. What did that group look like?
It was a real mix. 6 were at initial electrostress, 11 at medium, and 40 at advanced electrostress. Then, for the actual EHS levels, 3 were initial EHS, a big chunk, 43 were medium EHS, and 5 were advanced EHS. So pretty spread out across the severity range.
Okay, so a diverse group in terms of reported severity. Then they tried SPIRO. What exactly is SPIRO and what happened?
So SPIRO involves specific types of filters, but the study focuses more on the outcomes. And for the people who fully adopted it, that was 102 individuals, about 71% of the group, the results reported were quite striking.
Oh, so.
They reported that their painful symptoms, things like headaches or body aches they attributed to EMF, disappeared on average within about 36 hours.
Wow, that fast.
That's what they reported. And the more chronic stuff, the fatigue, general discomfort, weakness, anxiety, stress, poor sleep, that resolved on average within about 27 days. They also all reported significantly better sleep quality.
That's pretty dramatic improvement for over 2/3 of them. Did anything else seem to influence how well or how quickly they recovered?
Yeah, the study specifically notes that the people who also followed all the other recommendations, dietary changes, specific vitamins, hydration advice, other lifestyle adjustments, they tended to recover even faster than those who only use the SPIRO filters.
Suggesting a more holistic approach might be key.
It points that way, yeah, that the SPIRO intervention might work best as part of a broader strategy.
Okay, but what about the other 29%, the ones who didn't fully adopt SPIRO or maybe didn't stick to the other recommendations?
For them, the picture was less positive. They reported some improvement, but it was often temporary or incomplete. They still had sporadic pain symptoms, though maybe less often than before.
So partial effort yielded partial results.
That seems to be the implication. The study's conclusion was pretty direct on this. They stated that only the complete application of the SPIRO filters, combined with sticking to all the other lifestyle and nutritional advice, led to the complete elimination of EHS symptoms in the people they studied.
Right. Consistency and a multi-pronged approach seemed crucial in this particular study's findings for that intervention. Now, just looping back quickly to those links between specific EMFs and symptoms, did the study offer any more thoughts on why those connections might exist?
Well, they didn't delve too deep into the mechanisms, but they did reiterate the observations. Microwaves linked to tinnitus and neck pulses, ELF to numbness and tiredness. And they emphasized a pattern they saw,
Which was?
that people with EHS were often exposed to specific technologies, right? And when that exposure was controlled, maybe reducing use, maybe using filters like SPIRO, maybe changing the environment, and the person got educated about EHS, their symptoms tended to lessen or even go away.
So controlling exposure plus understanding the condition seemed important.
That's what they observed, yeah. It points to the potential value of both managing the environment and empowering the individual with knowledge.
Makes sense. The study also mentioned something about healthcare professionals, didn't it? A concern.
Yes, they raise the point that many doctors or other health professionals might just lack the specific training or awareness to properly identify EHS or know how to address it effectively.
Which could lead to misdiagnosis or unhelpful advice.
Exactly. The researchers felt there's a real need for more education about EHS within the medical community so people reporting these symptoms can get appropriate support.
And looking ahead, what do the study authors recommend for future research in this area?
They suggested future studies should probably use even more detailed surveys. Get really specific about mobile phone usage, for instance. Also look into potential food sensitivities, other health issues, and maybe assess psychological factors like paranoia or the nocebo potential more directly.
Okay, broaden the scope.
Yeah, and also incorporate more objective measures, things like heart rate variability, HRV monitoring, maybe detailed sleep tracking, to get a fuller physiological picture alongside the self-reported symptoms, moving towards a more multidimensional understanding.
That definitely sounds like a good direction. Now, just so we have a clear picture of who was actually in this study, can you remind us of the demographics?
Sure, the total group, 357 people, was 46 adult men, 189 adult women, and quite a few kids, 122 children.
Well, over a third were children.
Yeah. And then the subgroup of 144 who were willing to try the SPIRO intervention, that group skewed more female. 7 adult men, 108 adult women, and 29 children.
Interesting. The fact that so many children were involved initially really stands out. It definitely makes you think about potential long-term impacts of all this tech exposure starting so young.
Absolutely. It really does underscore the need for more research, specifically looking at children in developing bodies and how they might interact with these fields.
Well, this has been a really, really interesting deep dive into this study. So just to wrap it up for everyone listening, this 5-year research project suggests EHS is, well, certainly something reported quite a bit in their group, with symptoms often linked to specific EMF sources like Wi-Fi or power lines.
Right. And the nocebo effect seems to be a really complex part of the picture, where just the belief of harm can trigger symptoms. But also interventions aimed at both reducing exposure, like the SPIRO filters, and improving overall health through lifestyle changes showed significant promise for many in this study.
But clearly, more research is needed, right? This is one study, and the whole area needs more investigation.
Definitely. Rigorous research is key to understanding this better.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. As we're all surrounded by more and more electromagnetic fields every single day, this study kind of prompts the question, how can we become more aware of our own bodies, our own potential sensitivities?
Yeah, and maybe think about how we can create healthier environments for ourselves, regardless of where the scientific debate currently stands on the exact causes and mechanisms of EHS. It's about tuning into our own experience.
That's a really relevant point for everyone, I think. Maybe take a moment to consider your own daily EMF exposure and perhaps do a little digging into the different viewpoints on EHS and how people approach managing it. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.